In December 1941, I was a senior at college, and on Saturday night, the 6th, I was working on a major paper that had to be in on Monday. So I spent up the whole night, Saturday night, doing it, and went to bed very late Sunday morning. So I was sleeping soundly until somebody woke me up about noon to answer the phone. On the way down, I answered the phone from the sleeping porch, why he casually mentioned that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor and we were at war with Japan, which was a nice greeting for the first thing in the morning. The phone call was from my sister, who was at Stanford at the same time. She asked me what in the world I was going to do. And, I hadn't really thought about it, but we figured we were going to be called up the next day probably to have to go somewhere. So I thought, well, I'll probably join the Navy. At which point she burst into tears, and so I said, well, maybe I'll think about it for a while at least. And but things were really hectic. Nobody knew what they were going to do. This was really a distraction. Finals were coming up before Christmas, and for that semester. We immediately had to go into blackouts. The rugs got tacked up over the windows. Cars couldn't be driven with anything more than parking lights on. We had wardens walking the streets, seeing if there's at least a sliver of light showing anywhere. They would be on your door and give me a big lecture. So at night we'd have the radio on when we were trying to study, and there'd be air raids going on in San Francisco, or at least everybody saw Japanese planes and things presumably going over. And the aircraft were going everywhere. Flak was falling down, injuring people, and so it was a little bit hard to concentrate on your studies. I remember going on the following days to a class we had on strength of materials taught by an old Russian guy who was one of the leaders in the world in the subject, wrote the book and so on. And he gave us a real dressing down. And we had to pay attention to this. This is important stuff, we'd better get it. And quit worrying about the war. He himself had walked out of Russia during the Red Revolution when the communists took over and eventually wound up in America. So that shook us up some, and we settled down some, I guess. But people were getting hauled out, not allowed to finish, but the engineers were allowed. They decided to let them finish. The country was in desperate shape as far as manufacturing facilities for war were concerned. We'd gotten rid of our Army and our Navy in the peace agreements after World War I. We had a few old cruisers and things like that around, but that was it. So they shut down the automobile making and converted all of those plants to making trucks and tanks and other kinds of things. They even built a new steel mill and things like that. So they needed engineers, and a lot of them. So and the Army and the Navy had agreed that it was important to get people getting set up for manufacturing and support of the war effort, as it was in having people they had to train to fight. So I finished up, and lo and behold, General Electric comes along, and with renowned training programs, and offered me a training job in their engineering. So And that goes with a guarantee that after the war there would be a job available. So it sounded like a good idea, so I signed up with them. So graduation, 2 weeks, spent first week getting a little bit of tonsil removed that was giving me trouble. And then it was on an airplane to go back to Schenectady, New York, to begin life with GE. First time I'd been that far from home, of course.
Yeah.